So how many people that knew Berl Boykin in this circle, raise your hands and show me if you even knew about Berl and Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't know. If you didn't know. So see, we have some people that knew him that were close friends and didn't know that he was.
Just never know.
I'm Dave Hayward. I'm the coordinator of Touching Up Our Roots, which is Georgia's LGBTQ story project. And I started it with Berl. And I told him in 2002, I said, I'm not going to do this alone. I need to have somebody do it with me. And so we did it together. He was a Grand Marshal for the first Pride Parade in 1971. He said, no, I was the Grand Marshal. Not A, I was the Grand Marshal. And what he would always say was, he said, there are 125 people. I know. I counted them twice. And then the other big thing about him, too, is that in 71, he and Bill Smith and the late Klaus Smith had a meeting with Governor Jimmy Carter. And Carter had an open thing so anybody could show up. So they came in unannounced. And Bill Smith and Klaus Smith and Berl Boykin asked Carter to support an array of pro-LGBTQ legislation. And he said Carter turned all different kinds of colors of the rainbow, and not our rainbow, another rainbow. And he said, no. That was the end of that meeting. But the good news about that is that then Berl and I went to the Carter Center in 2004, end of 2004, and said, well, how would you like to come out in form of same-sex civil unions? That was the big thing in 2004. And so finally we did. So yay! Happy ending.
When he was a student in the early 60s at Emory University, back in the benighted days in Georgia, where Georgia was mostly dry, and you couldn't buy a drink in Atlanta on a Sunday, or at the grocery store, or anything else, he, in order to support himself as a student at Emory, used to do what they called milk runs of moonshine from North Georgia down into the city of Atlanta. He did that for a while until he has amassed enough capital. He and another fellow decided to go into business for themselves.
Yet another story about Berl.
Set up their own still, which worked out fine until the revenuers found it. And as he put it to me, they cut our pot, because that's what they said back in the day. You didn't call it a still, you called it a pot.
Oh my God.
And the revenuers found it and cut it, so that was the end of that. Berl invited a young man, I assume his same age, he was a young man at the time too, of course. He invited someone up to spend some time with him in his room in the dormitory at Emory. And in those days, they evidently gave the house overseer, floor walker, whatever you call him, keys to everybody's room. And this guy had evidently been laying for Berl and walked in on him using the pass key. And that was the end of Berl's career.
Walked in on them what?
But what a hell of a great guy he was!
He just worked for his mom. Had her own interpretation. I remember delivering $5 million in suitcases when I was a kid because I was the mustache to Al Capone's son when he sold out his interest in Florida. So you figure it yourself.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome.
Yeah, guess what my name is? No, Barbara Joy, yeah. And I've known Berl since the Berk days. So, I could say a lot of things, but, and I also visited him in the nursing home as Tony and Barry and Walter and probably some other people here did, I think maybe Bob, yeah. And that was kind of a mixed blessing, because of the way he had a lot of issues that were never really addressed adequately, but they kept him alive. Okay. So he gave me a collection of poems that he did. I think these are all from about 15 years ago. I don't have the most recent ones. But and I have the book that he, through his friend Sam Lancaster, got published abroad, I believe in Japan. The Last Word. It was actually more like the first word, the first thing he published. And so I looked through these things quickly today, and most of his poems are kind of depressing, but but very interesting. And so I just picked a couple that I thought would be good. Okay. Here's the first one. When I say depressing, I don't know. Maybe I was feeling sad. Many of them are very interesting, and he's written some funny ones. I just don't happen to have one. This is called The Last Word. The day the last sun died, the last mind sighed, regret to a stilled cosmos. All is expressed, all that may be has been, each pattern played in matter that is possible and understood. Our final worship is to comprehend. All parts are acted now but one. I too at last seek solace in the kind eternities of death. And center deep within the metal sphere, his Aeon carapace, a relay closed, and fields that had maintained 10 million years of solitude collapsed. The minor nova flared its randomed atoms, splayed last sparks in Plano where burned one time a universe, briefly fired the sky of orbited dead planet, and played out. The day the last sun died, the last man died. Then changeless science swallowed all and ceaseless cold, and darkness absolute. But the next one is a little more upbeat. He wrote a lot about the death of the universe for some reason. Okay. This is called Iowa, or actually it's called Versus Iowa. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah.
You know that one?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really? If only poetry could conquer death, poets would outnumber barbers, grocers, plumbers, cosmeticians, undertakers, those who drive our tanks and trucks. Iams, spondees, and dactyls then would dance their rhythms on each tongue, and every dialogue would reek of metaphor. Instead, the chife of rot, a stale perfume, lingers like a rude, unwelcome guest who haunts the banquet of the sensuous night, and like news of cancer spoils each day. Mind ear hears only silence in the atonal symphony of the shattered age. Poets forget each syllable builds to a song. The half-wise swear chopped prose is lyric now. Sense too is now declared superfluous. Ugly chatter grows like fungus over every page. What withered wisdom of dark past remains to whisper silent to the inner ear in still susurrus utters, so every pregnant word may bear a song deliberate. Astronomers say, in 500 million years the seas will boil away, the whirling ocean of the winds will dry up, drop by drop by drop. The sickly, puffed up sun will eat the earth at last like a great sow who gobbles up her piglets. Sense is useless then, and honey taste of sound at end, devoid of consequence, till that hot, horrid day of ever night may clever poets live and make words sing. Let every human present know only poetry can conquer death. That's from 2008. Okay.
My name is Walter Reeves, and I'm going to crank this thing up because I can't bend over like that. Anyhow, I knew Berl from the time I was 17. And I make no exaggeration when I say he was my oldest and dearest friend. He was my mentor, he was my instructor, and he was my comrade. And I searched around because something like 30 years ago or more, I wrote a mock funeral oration for him. When I first finally broke through and started writing poetry of my own that was worthy of the name. Unfortunately, though I read it to him at the time and he much enjoyed it, he made me swear up and down to never reveal it to anyone else until after he was passed. And consequently, there was not more than one copy of it, and I can't find it. Oh, no. However, I can remember the first and last stanza, and it was a repetitive thing. And I think when I recite the first and last stanza, you'll recognize what the repetition was. So it started out like this. When you lay before us in your groaning coffin, chastened and chaste as you never were in life, we will speak of you, of your intellect and insight, time to poetry's pulse, your laughing, feeding, fountain mouth, and we shall say, he was a great figure. Taking up the burden of our woe, gray maidens bear you to bitterest Valhalla, leaving us crippled, blind, alone. The great figure has departed. I really wish I could have found the whole thing. I poured my heart into it, loved the man. But on that score, there is a poem in here that I think he would really like to be remembered by, because he wrote it to someone he loved very dearly. And it was a poem that has always stayed with me ever since, if I can just find it now. Hold on a second. Here we go. It's called For David. I want to send you something exquisite, exotic geisha, porcelain moth-wing delicate, a conch-horn whistling time through windings intricate. I hope to send you something exquisite. Can poor words ever do, caught in their endless turning, like dervish Sheila's gyroscope in spiral galaxies, truth's net and veil, revealing by disguising, obscuring nebula to meaning star, that pulsar black holes the equity of sound and light, spinning hard riddles in its X-ray night. Rhymed image, that of winter far, from warm sharings of the human night, our melt meter cadence to unmar, staccato drum pulse of New York, their plasma gels, at last to concrete ice cubes of the soul. At last few hopes may live where few trees grow. And I digress into the infinite, in search to find you something delicate, in hope to mold you something exquisite, as moments when your supple gender, trumpeting from thighs like mellow ivory, vibrated basso joy through sheathed member in silent speeches of delight, made gravid then my tongue with liquid night, that now bears song for your delight, bears sentiment wrought intricate, dance work delicate, as I, perhaps, have shaped you something exquisite.
So when Tony officially opened Ray Kluka Memorial Park to the public.
What's your name?
Oh, I'm Glenn Deans. I've known Berl for 34 years, I guess, 35. Met him when I was 21 years old. Not coincidentally enough, as a member of any counterculture society or underground newspaper or anything like that. Berl loved to play role-playing games and gaming in general, and that's how I met him, as a fellow gamer. Yeah. So I wrote a little piece for Berl when we dedicated the three, what were they, Tony? The three? Rhododendrons. Thank you very much, sir. And we had a little celebration of Berl at that time, and this is what I wrote. So Berl Boykin, born April 7th, 1944, passed on to greener pastures October 6th, 2018. Berl Boykin was a longtime Atlanta radio and print personality, known for his outspoken activism in the cause of moral and ethical fair treatment for all Georgians, regardless of race, creed, orientation, and class. His tireless efforts resulted in advancing social changes for Georgians of all stripes, and his creativity and boundless optimism were shown in his writings and productions for The Great Speckled Bird, Georgia Public Radio, Radio Free Georgia, WRFG, as well as the science fiction and fantasy groups he was a part of. Berl is most famously known as the Grand Marshal of the First Atlanta Pride Parade in 1971, June. He himself was a victim of discrimination as a student at Emory University, where he was unfairly expelled due to his orientation. This spurred him to become one of the most outspoken advocates for equality the state has ever known, as a member of the Georgia Mattachine Society and the Georgia Gay Liberation Front. He involved himself in many other causes as well. He was a dedicated election monitor who helped ensure fair elections for decades. He also worked to end religious and class discrimination, and his heroism knew no bounds. Initially, he was known for his work at the Great Speckled Bird, where as a journalist and poet, he covered many famous Atlanta events, such as the 1969 and 1970 Atlanta Pop Festivals, where artists such as Led Zeppelin and Chicago introduced themselves to their future rabid fans. Although his work saw print for many years, he eventually bridged out into radio with Horror House, where he not only produced original plays, but also adapted numerous H.P. Lovecraft books for radio theater. He was a frequent contributor to Atlanta and Georgia Public Radio as their chief drama critic, and produced Horror House on WRFG, Radio Free Georgia, as well. He's also known for the following. He's featured, the feature actor, in the official Rolling Stones Painted Black video produced at Six Flags Over Georgia for MTV. He was a longtime convention guest at Dragon Con, Chattacon, and the Atlanta Fantasy Fair. And finally, and this is where I knew him, he was a charter member of Georgia's oldest role-playing gaming group, the Knights of the Silver Dragon, where Berl would play a illusionist, female human, a foil to my heroic paladin. Constant foil, I might add, where everything I would try to do, he would come behind and undermine me at every turn. And as such, he was much beloved. But finally, Berl had a secret. Berl didn't make a lot of money after he wasn't at WAV. And WRFG is free. I mean, when you get on WRFG, you don't get paid. You're basically there to do your show and get off, but you don't, it's all free. So what did Berl do for a living? Berl is an accountant and a tax advisor, and a damn good one. And I swear, if he didn't help you guys with your money, I would be shocked, because he certainly helped me with mine. And I will be forever grateful to Berl for helping me keep my house, keep my head above water, and just keep me going to be here today. So thank you, Berl Boykin. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Can you hear this?
Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm Bob Darby, and I first met Berl Boykin when I came back from some of my wanderings from California in 1971. As it turned out, of course, a lot of people I knew from when I was in college at Emory knew Berl, because I was a movement person. Mainly I was in the anti-war movement. Before that, the civil rights movement, and a member of an organization at Emory called the Southern Student Organizing Committee. Well, okay, can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. So Berl and I were part of the same general progressive community. And I knew him, it turns out, through several other people, so it was inevitable that we would have become friends ourselves. And the first thing that really attracted to me to Berl was his brilliance. I mean, this guy was freakishly intelligent. And well, I remember one time when I was in graduate school briefly at Georgia State, and I had a small apartment on Piedmont Avenue near 10th Street. And Berl was visiting me, and I had a book next to my next to my chair, and he asked me what I was reading, and it was some kind of history book. And he said, "What is it? Well, tell me about it." So I opened it, handed it to him, the page where I was in the book, He looked at it for a few minutes, handed it back to me. I said, Berl, what'd you read? What do you think? And he repeated it verbatim, an entire page. And this is something I'd read about when I was a college student in psychology, called an eidetic memory, which is rare. It's about 1 in tens of thousands. Actually, I thought it was like 1 in millions. And the last time I saw Berl at the Buckhead nursing home, I recalled this incident to him. And I said, Berl, I think you're 1 in several million. And he said, oh, no, you're wrong, Bob. It's like 1 in several tens of thousands. and I was just completely blown away. And that same night, when he demonstrated his eidetic memory to me, I said, well, can you do the same thing with math? And he said, well, give me a try. So I said, what's the square root of 26,321 or something like that? And I had a calculator, a little primitive calculator from 1972. And he did like this. About 30 seconds later, he gave me the exact square root of the 5-digit number. And so the man was not only brilliant, verbally and in terms of that kind of thing with words, but he also understood hard science. The downside to that was that Berl was a bit arrogant. I mean, he was a great guy, and I enjoyed his company, and he somehow seemed to enjoy mine because I had a narrow vein of smarts myself, but it wasn't thorough like his. I mean, I could talk literature and history and stuff like that. Although he was superior to me in those fields, I could sometimes contribute to the conversation, and he would appreciate that. But I think the only thing which I actually knew more than he did about was academic psychology, because I had training in it. He was kind of lazy, and that's not something he wanted to study very much, although he certainly could have. I was a little envious of him, but mainly I was just fascinated with his brilliance. And I went through an extremely hard time, starting about 1977, when I had to struggle with manic depression, and it almost destroyed me. And I lost so many friends because of it. But Berl remained loyal to me. And I had very few friends anywhere, but Berl remained my friend. And when I was bouncing between my hometown of Vidalia, Georgia, and Atlanta, he would always be someone I could talk with and spend time with. He was very loyal to me. So when I got back on my feet in 1985 and decided to stop taking the zombie pills that this idiot doctor in Vidalia, Georgia was insisting I take, and got back on my feet, and I inherited a good bit of money and started globetrotting. I took Berl with me to Europe, and we spent a couple of months in Europe, and he was an incredible tour guide. I mean, I knew a good bit about European history, but not nearly as much as he did. And we went to Athens, Greece, and he told me all these things about ancient Greek history, and went to Sparta, went to Corinth. We didn't go to the islands, but you couldn't do everything. And we went to London, and he had all sorts of information about London. I mean, just astonishing. We just walking around. Here's Berl, 400 pounds. But he somehow still managed to get around. And one day, this is an interesting little story, at Trafalgar Square of all places, he was accosted by a group of ruffians. These children were making fun of him because he was so fat and ungainly. And Berl used to walk around with a sharpened pencil and twirl it like this all the time. Excuse me, I walk around with my cane. That's not exactly a weapon, but if I had to use this one, I would. Well, he would have to use, if he had to use this sharpened pencil as a weapon, he would. So these 4 or 5 little kids in Trafalgar Square in the middle of London started taunting him. And Berl was walking around like he had a knife or something, keeping them at bay. Eventually they ran off. But he was quite an entertaining person, as well as being possessed of a fascinatingly brilliant mind. And in a way, I was rewarding him for his loyalty when I took him to Europe with him. We also went to Hawaii, Fiji, Australia as well, in another trip. And he just never ceased to amaze me. If there's a downside to that, I think it's that he was indeed a little arrogant, and sometimes more than a little arrogant, but he was always kind to me. And I wasn't always the easiest person to be kind to, because I'm a little bit arrogant myself, although I don't have as much reason to be arrogant as he had. And so we got along real well, until finally he told me it was exactly 19 years before he died. Something happened between us that really, I don't think was so much his fault, but I thought it was his fault. I got really mad with him, and I said, I don't want to see you anymore. I don't have anything to do with you. And didn't for 19 years. And I was finally reconciled with him, thanks to Barry and Barbara, who said, why don't you see Berl again? He's in this nursing home, and he's ambivalent about seeing you as well, but you know, so I called him. And he was friendly to me, and I was friendly to him, and we kind of buried the axe, so to speak. And you know, we didn't talk about what had separated us so much. We just figured, well, it's time to forget that. And so I went over to visit him in his nursing home about 3 weeks before he died. And he was ashen in appearance and clearly very weak, but he was just the same old brilliant self. And not having spoken to him in 19 years, I said 20, he corrected me, he says 19, Bob. So, okay, 19, Berl. And we talked for 7 hours nonstop, because we had very much identically the same interests. And yeah, I'm fascinated with some types of knowledge, although I'm not good at hard science and math and stuff like that, which he is. But you know, I've always had some interest. I'm a writer myself, although not nearly as accomplished as Berl was. But yeah, I like to write. I enjoy words. And so and I'm I enjoy conversation. Of course, he was a brilliant conversationalist. And we talked and we talked and we talked. And that was the last time I saw him. And I called him a couple of times before he died, and both times he said, I'm too tired to talk. The next thing I heard, he was dead. So it was, you know, it was sad, and I'm sorry, but that's the way it goes. Goodbye, Berl.
Well, I knew Berl when he and I were children, maybe 10 or 11 years old, in Miami, Florida, and indeed witnessed his disappearance when I went into school one day and discovered that he wasn't there, and never knew where he went. But we were quite unusual at that period. We were chess players when the rest of the school were not. We were philosophically on the same level, speaking about anti-religion and possibly a whole other element. I remember talking about something called general semantics with him. And general semantics is a philosophy launched by an anti-war activist, anti-World War I activist, Alfred Krasipsky, who spoke to a system that he launched to teach sanity. I think Berl and I were on a lot of other levels of the same nature and the same type of person. When he disappeared, I got in trouble with the small middle school coach, who was the moral center of that school, who called me into a small meeting where he told me that my anti-religion and pro philosophical happenstance or focus would get me into all sorts of trouble and probably cause me to be maybe a beatnik or maybe worse.
Horrors.
He was right.
He definitely was right.
I think it's about the time that I was hoping to be a
In any case, after Berl disappeared, he reappeared at Emory at the same time that I appeared at Emory, but in some odd, unusually extraordinary fashion, we didn't find each other. I learned far later that he was in the same dormitory as I. And but I just didn't know him, and didn't discover that until very, very recently. I do find my memory of Berl to be of a very extraordinary person with a very wide range of interests, and I must say that I find his absence to be uncomfortable. I really found him to be extraordinary. That's it.
We went to see a movie called The Passover Plot.
Yeah.
That was playing in a theater that later became the second home of the Film Forum when it moved from Anson Mall out to Buckhead, which they could afford to do because they had the sole rights at the time to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was really just sucking in the cash for them. And they used to have great stage shows, I understand, out there at the showings of Rocky Horror at midnight, with everybody getting up on stage and performing parts and whatnot. But this was before all that. And gosh, I guess it would have been sometime around 74, sometime in there. And we went to see this film. And we went in and we were watching it. And there were a couple of families there. And they obviously didn't know what kind of movie they'd gone to see. They were expecting some straightforward biblical epic about the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Whereas anyone who knows about the Passover plot realizes that it is quite something else altogether. It's based on the premise that the whole thing was put together intentionally to give the impression that Jesus was the Messiah. And that probably Jesus actually believed he was the Messiah, but really it was all connived. But about midway through the film, these families started one by one getting up and ushering their children out of the theater because they brought them to have religious instruction and they were getting heresy instead, at least by their own lights. And Berl just was absolutely delighted with the movie and delighted with the reaction. He was really enjoying it. Then we came out of the theater to discover that there were fundamentalist pickets outside protesting the film. Well, you can just imagine that this got Berl really cranked up. And the next thing I know, he's on the phone talking to everybody he can get a hold of about organizing a counter picket against the fundamentalist Christians. And he didn't have too much trouble roping me into it. And about a half dozen of us went down the next night with signs and everything, calling ourselves the Communist Anti-Christian Crusade, or CACL, and staged a counter picket with a great deal of interaction with the fundamentalist pickets, some of whom were actually amused when they first saw us until they started talking to Berl and they found out he really, really meant it. And it was quite a highlight of my youth, I must say. Berl was responsible for a lot of highlights of my youth, come to think of it. Certainly responsible for me meeting some people who've been very significant to me in my life since then. And I can really understand what Barry is saying, because let's just say Berl's absence leaves a very big hole in my life. But I am, as always, grateful for having had the opportunity to know him, grateful for having the opportunity to be his friend and to have him as a friend. Hell, I probably never would have gone to Europe if I had known Berl.
So I met Berl because I went to a small event to talk about having a birthday party for Berl. And it was at James Yancey's house. And so while we were there, somebody said, well, we want this rainbow cake from Cow Tippers. We've got $11 we can put toward it. And I went, well, that's a $42 or $45 cake. I'll buy the cake, let's use that for balloons or something else. And so then it was like, well, we need to do this, and we need to make sure that, blah, blah, and I went, okay, wait, just tell me where Berl is. I will make sure that we have a cake, and he's all dressed, and everything's fine. So that's how I met Berl, and that was in April of last year. So when I first met him, I had him hold his hands up side by side, and it looked like the skyline of New York. They were very jagged, like keys. And I immediately went to the front desk, and then I went to the management downstairs and said, either you cut his nails today, or I will cut his nails. And no, you will not cut his nails. And I said, if you don't cut them, they will be cut before he goes to sleep tonight. So that was my first conversation with him on the first day that I met him. So, and I was with him for 6.5 months of his life. So, he was a lovely man. I heard many of these stories, and on a regular basis, he would tell me stories, or he would go, before you go, let me tell you this small poem. And he would recite. So, but he was a really lovely man, and we had a lot of fun. I've told this once before. One of my favorite things was whenever he was in the hospital, and it was the last few days, he could barely breathe. And he could barely talk. And he said, the doctor came in, and it was early, it was like 6:45 one morning, and I had to go to work. And so while we were there, the doctor comes in, the nurses, assistants, there were 6 people that came into the room immediately. And the doctor, as soon as he walked in, he said, well, Berl, what's the best thing about your day-to-day? I was like, wow, what a question. And I was standing right beside him because I had just given him some water, and we were talking, or I was talking to him, and he reached over and he touched me right in the center of my chest. So it was cool to have that kind of relationship with a stranger, basically. So
He was sweet.
he was a sweet guy, but he was a son of a bitch too, as someone said at the graveside thing that we did at Kluka Park. He was funny. He didn't have a real good rapport with the staff there at Buckhead. And then I brought flowers one day and a card because he said, you know, it's be friendly to your, what is it? Caretakers Nurses Day for nursing care facilities or something. It was that holiday. And I was like, how did you know that? And so I brought flowers and a card that I thought was kind of fitting, and he wrote a message to them. As soon as they saw the flowers and they read the message, his care changed drastically. And then they became buddies in a whole new light. And so, anyway, it was just fun. First I called the last nurse and doctor that were caring for Berl. And she was leaving out the door, and the nurse said, oh, Tony, with Berl, yes, hold on. She calls her to the phone. She said, oh my God, yes, hold on, let me call the morgue. She comes back on like maybe 30 seconds later and said, the guy downstairs, his name is such and such. Yes, you need to call him now. I pick up the phone, I called the morgue, and he said, all right, well, this is really good information. He said, but you've got 24 hours, and you have to call me within 12 to keep me posted with what's going on. He said, as many people that I see that the family gets the money and they don't care if they're thrown in a dumpster, he said, this is a great story, and I'll do anything that I need to do to help you. The next morning, I'm in Toccoa, Georgia, waiting for the mortuary that embalmed his mother, father, and brother, and that he already had a stone that was in the same cemetery right beside him.
Wow.
So that was the next day. Well, they said, well, it's going to be X amount of dollars. And so my husband and I write a check, go, yep, do it. Before I can get on the road, I am 30 minutes away from Toccoa coming to Atlanta, and they call me and said, Berl's body just got here. Like, wow. So all this stuff happened like in moments. So it was just kind of cool the way that all came together.
By the way, I don't think you still got paid back, so if you guys go on to GoFundMe for Berl Boykin, it's still out there. It's still out there.
Didn't you, from the GoFundMe?
Yeah, a number of my gaming buddies chipped in a little bit. And we
There were a
watched
lot
it.
of people gave. But it's not a big deal. That's the least of concern. But I'm glad because I got to meet all of you guys. and y'all are very crucial in helping to be a grounding, a position that I can drive down the fucking road looking like this and not get chemically castrated before 5 p.m.
Listen, you don't understand. It's wonderful to see you be able to do that because I remember what would have happened.
Yeah,
when I was a kid.
I can believe that.
Oh,
And
let
that
me tell
film
you.
about Stonewall really lays it out. You know, it was on public TV a couple of
Yes.
weeks ago. Very powerful about what happened to people back in the day. There's probably other films too, but that was the last one I saw.
So thank you all for your courage. Thank you for your commitment, your love, and your help in making a huge difference for us all.
And thanks, Tony. You really did work miracles with him in that nursing home.
That whole-
Tony came in out of nowhere, well, out of the community, and just incredible.
Big,
was
bright
wonderful.
rainbow angel wings. A big, bright angel
Really?
rainbow halo.
It was fun. I never looked like this then.
No, not in the nursing home, no.
All right,
And
I guess we
thank you,
can.
Berl, for bringing all these.
Oh my
Thank you,
God!
Berl.
If not for Berl, we wouldn't be coming together.